We're so excited to have on the show two very special guests. Just a few days ago, the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economics was awarded to three US-based professors. What they essentially did with their research over decades is show how the political and economic systems introduced by colonizers can determine whether a country is rich or poor in the present day. Today on the show, we're so excited that we have two of the three winners with us right here. So we're just going to introduce you to them, then we'll start by asking them what it was like to win the Nobel Prize. We have with us Professor Simon Johnson from MIT. We have Professor James Robinson from the University of Chicago. They're both joining us here on the show. Simon, if we could come to you first. Firstly, congratulations on your win. Tell our audiences, this is the first time we're actually having Nobel Prize winners here on The Breakfast Club. What is it like to get that call? Were you sleeping? Do you come to know immediately that you've received the prize on the call itself? Do they say there's big news coming? What is that like?
Well, I didn't actually get the call. I slept through it. I didn't expect anyone would be calling me, so my telephone was off. And I woke up at around 6 a.m. my time, which is my usual waking up time, and I saw all kinds of notifications on my phone, and I thought, that's very strange. And the first message that I really understood, because I was waking up, was one from the office of MIT's president saying, we have a press conference at 10 a.m. this morning, be there. I thought, well, that's not in my calendar, what's happening? And then I began to, journalists started to call me and so on, and the whole thing began to dawn on me.
Wow. Okay, I just want to tell our audiences, we will in just a second take a deep dive into both of your bodies of research. You obviously made this paper, you've done the studies together over the last few years. We'll ask you about that in a second, but we do want to ask you, James, tell us, is there a gentle murmur in the days leading up to the award? So is there a sense that you have that, okay, my name has been, suggested, there's a discussion going on around it. Is there an inkling that you have?
I don't think there's a murmur like that. I think, there's a set of people who, could win it. But, if you asked me to write down, if you'd asked me the day before it was announced who was on that list, I could have put, 30 or 40 names on the list, and maybe ours would have been on the list, but I think it could have gone to any of those 30 or 40 people, so I don't think there's any kind of murmur in the sense that, there's any, people do bet money on things like that, but I don't think, in my experience, there's no real information. It's an amazingly well-kept secret.
Simon, what does researching with someone for 2 decades actually, more than 2 decades actually look like? I know there was an interview that described all three of you as best friends. Do you disagree with that?
Well, I would say we're best colleagues.
Okay.
And I think what that means is we complement each other, we complete each other's sentences, we challenge each other. It doesn't mean we hang out with each other all the time. I think sometimes we need a break from each other, to be completely honest. But yes, it is a very intense cooperative partnership that we've had and that we've built and that we actually now continue.
Okay, if we could now take a deeper dive into your work itself, let's tell our Breakfast Club audiences exactly what it is that you have won this for. Can you tell us, and James, we'll take this question to you, your work over the last few decades has essentially looked to answer the question, why are certain countries poorer than other countries? And you argue through your work and through your research that the kind of institutions that were set up in a country, that actually holds the answer to whether or not that country is poor in the present day. You've also argued that to understand this better, one needs to look at the kind of colonialism a country had. And you've made a very interesting difference there. So you've said that there can be, when it comes to the institutions a country has, extractive institutions or inclusive institutions. It gets a little complex. Can you just break it down for our viewers?
What we developed a theory of was, what explains, of course, the institutions that emerged in the United States were very different from that which emerged in Latin America or Africa, or, so we tried to develop a theory of, why some colonies developed institutions that kind of supported economic growth and economic development, and other countries didn't. And that's where that dichotomy of inclusive and extractive you mentioned comes in, because what we argued is that it really depends a lot on the initial conditions in the colonies, and in particular, where there was a lot of indigenous people or natural resource, then you got very extractive institutions. A very hierarchical society got set up based on the exploitation of indigenous people and natural resources. But where those factors were absent, then the only way, in a place like Australia or in a place like the United States, then to have a viable colony, you had to have white settlements. You had to have European settlement, not white, but European settlements coming. And then very different types of societies emerged. So it was all to do with the initial conditions in the colonies.
But I do want to ask, and Simon, we'll take this question to you. You're essentially tying in the way a country is today to the kind of colonialism that it saw and the kind of institutions that were set up by that colonialism. But what about a country's post-independence decisions? Because you have so many countries that once they get independent, attempted to redefine their institutions. India's obviously coming to mind. You've made your institutions more inclusive after independence. What happens then?
I think there was, a huge wave of enthusiasm and determination behind the idea of breaking up the European empires, particularly after the 1940s. I think the leadership, personally, I think the leadership role and the role model of Mahatma Gandhi was very important, obviously not just in India, but in many other places. And I think there was genuine desire to build something inclusive, which means more people have more rights, more people can participate in the modern economy, there's more opportunities, and also more political voice. We think these things go together. Unfortunately, in some places, or even actually in many places, it proved quite hard to sustain that, and there was some, let's say, falling back to a more extractive mode of ruling, and those extractive modes were exactly what, in many cases, the colonial authorities had established.
So you're saying it's very tricky to maintain those changes. If we could ask you, and James, we'll take this question to you. We did want to understand how you feel your research, which you've now explained to our audiences exactly what that research was. How do you feel it has impacted or maybe moved the needle in the field that you're in? Because you're in the field of developmental economics. 2019, you had Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Dufalo, both professors. They won the Nobel in the same field. How do you hope your research moves the needle?
I think our work is very different from most work in development economics, because most work in development economics is sort of predicated on the idea that people in poor countries don't really know what to do. And we need to come up with ways of finding ways to solve their problems. But that's not my experience in working in the development world. For me, in my experience, people in Nigerians know much better than Western academics what needs to be done. They just can't cooperate to do it. So our view is, this is about politics, and it's about power, and it's about people changing their societies. It's not about economists coming with clever ideas or new ideas, So I think our view is sort of fundamentally different from the view of Professor Banerjee and Professor Duflo, to be honest with you.
Professor James, Professor Simon, thank you for joining us here on the Breakfast Club. The research you've done over the last few decades obviously is hugely impactful, but also complex. So we hope we were able to some degree, break down that for you, explain to you why it is that they were able to win such a prestigious award by showing why it is that certain countries are poorer than others. That's essentially the one line which they will use often in interviews to summarize their research. Why are some countries poorer than other countries today across the entire world? Okay, we hope that provided you with a little bit of context into this groundbreaking research. We're going to head into a quick break. Coming up after the break, we have something entirely different. We're taking you to the roads. 2024 Audi Q8, the first drive review. Overdrive is going to bring you the answer to whether or not this is the luxury SUV that you've been waiting for. It has power, it has style, but is it the ultimate luxury SUV experience? That and more in just a few minutes.